Welcome to Turn the Key. My name is Cindy. This is a Lock and Key podcast where we're going to go issue by issue reviewing Lock and Key. And I'm joined by my amazing husband, Matthew, aka MangaMatt.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Great to be here as well. So, for those of you out there who don't want any spoilers, but I don't know why you would click on this if you didn't want any spoilers, but we're going to first give our review of issue number 1 before we dig into it. So, my rating for issue number 1 is a very surprising 5 out of 10.
Yeah, the main issue, I think, with Lock and Key, especially the first issue and most of the first volume itself, is that Joe Hill, the author, he's really only ever done novels and books, and so usually that means you have a lot of setup and you have a lot of things that have to be put in place as far as setting, characters, and structure, and that means that there's an implied commitment that you're going to go a decent amount of the way into the story.
Alright, so we're about to dig into all of the spoilers. So for those of you who don't want any spoilers, please go read first issue and come back and listen to more of our little podcast. And for those of you who want to read along with us, please turn your comic to the first page, which is a huge door with a moth, and my husband here mentioned that there's something really interesting on the moth. What was it? The skull on the back?
Yeah, it's a particular kind of moth. It's known mostly as the skull-faced moth. And moths in general are seen as kind of images of like death. You know, the way butterflies are usually seen as like spring and rebirth and life. Moths, because again they're nocturnal, they're usually seen more as like death and the underworld or looming death, and especially a moth with a skull on its back. And this is a little more interesting because this moth is actually most known for that iconic poster for Silence of the Lambs. An obvious reference you're going to see all through Lock and Key. There's going to be lots of things that I may or may not consider to be a trope or a reference to other horror icons and such. So if I'm full of it, then I'm full of it. But it's my tinfoil hat way of seeing things when I'm reading this.
Well, first time I read through this, I noticed the skull, but I didn't think it was anything important. So nice catch. And then in the next page, you have these two boys, one with an axe, one with a gun in the back, and they knock on his door. And this lady opens and says, "Hey, what are you doing here?" The boys say that they know her husband and that he asks them to visit whenever they're in town. The lady's a little skeptical, but she says, he did. I like your pickup. And she comments on their pickup truck parked outside, which it shows us the back of it, which has two dead bodies. One, a girl, and one, a man. We can assume that that's the uncle that the boys are referring to.
Yeah, they say that they borrowed the truck, but actually, more likely they killed them and they've taken the truck now.
And then the next page, we have the Locke kids. Okay, so you're gonna have to help me with the names. Well, it's been forever since I've read the comic. So first we have the older one.
The oldest one is I forget the oldest one's name, but the youngest is called Bodhi. Bodhi is the littlest kid, and he's actually going to be probably the most important as far as
the story goes. Yeah, no spoilers for anything that isn't in the first issue.
But as far as say the other kids, You know, it's one of those things where it's like you remember it, but we'll just say there's an oldest brother, and then the second oldest who's a daughter, and then the youngest boy, which is Bodhi, because they actually haven't said their names outright yet in this story.
So you have the oldest boy looking at the lake, and first he sees himself in like a surfer outfit, talking about how this summer, if he was visiting with one of his cousins, I think he said, he would be surfing and going to beach parties. And then the next panel, you see him in kind of like a rebellious, like emo, like punk rock outfit, talking about if he was visiting his other cousin, he would go into concerts every Friday, hooking up with all the ladies. And then the next panel, his little brother interrupts his daydreams with poop on his hand
now
from a random turtle.
Now that panel right there, you may think it means nothing, but I'm gonna blow your mind with that panel. Okay. So if you want, we can wait until the page where I think it reveals it.
Let's get there.
Okay, we'll wait until we get there.
The suspense is murdering me. You wouldn't believe it.
Oh, unlike these people. Now, this next panel, we actually get a full shot of all the kids together as the daughter, as the sister comes up to talk to the two boys. And what you'll notice is that the dad has been working on painting the house white, and that the daughter is actually covered in smudges of white paint.
Yeah, in her overall.
Meaning that obviously she's been helping the dad paint while the two boys have been out playing. Which
this is actually kind of interesting, because I think this plays into something that she says a little at the end of the first issue, and I'm gonna put a pin in this. We're gonna come back to this, but you can clearly see that she's the most helpful when it comes to the dad, helping him paint and everything. And from her outfit, you can see she's really carefree. She doesn't care that much about her looks. She has dreadlocks, piercings all over the place. She's like very carefree.
And of course, she then mentions that she's been helping dad paint, and she's wishing that the other boys would have come in and pitched in too for it.
The older brother is complaining about working for free, while the younger brother is just focusing on the poop. Now, and the last panel of the pages, we see the dad open the door.
Yeah, page 11.
Page 11, covered in white paint and overalls, just like the girl, and he comes in with the guy with the gun, ready to shoot him, and the guy with the axe. This leads us into the next page, where it's a funeral scene where we can clearly see that the father has died. We have one urn where he was cremated, and we see the eldest boy standing in front of it, looking upset, but definitely no tears. He looks kind of constipated to me. I'm sorry. Just the art doesn't convey I'm upset. It conveys confusion and constipation.
Well, I think it's more that it has to do with what he starts thinking about after he leaves it. But before that, on this splash page, it's interesting that the urn, that they decided to cremate him, instead of, say, like a closed casket or something. And then on top of that too, that the urn is all red.
Yes.
With
the brightest color within the whole entire page.
Yeah, like you're immediately drawn to it. Yeah. And that's of course an immediate contrast to the last page where he was covered in white.
Yeah.
And then also there's sort of like a ring of roses. White roses. And that's it's kind of like that's sort of like a barrier around all of this black that's actually wrinkled around, looking kind of like a sea.
Yes.
It's this sacred object that's being protected by this ring of purity against all this blackness that's coming to get it. And I don't know, maybe that I'm just trying to, because it's not a coincidence this is a full page
No.
drawn. It's done that way because it's supposed to mean something.
Right. It's shocking and it's attention gaining. Like it draws your attention immediately to the urn. It's well done. Me personally, I don't like the face. I'm sorry, the face is just not as convincing as everything else around the face.
I think maybe what it's trying to do is the urn is here, dead center in the page, and then when you go to the next page, you're focused on the oldest again, but he's looking right at the urn again. So so you, the reader, are understanding that this urn is something that he's looking at and thinking about. And even when it's sort of tucked away and hidden in the back, you're drawn to him who's drawn to that urn. So you're in his mind, where his mind is still thinking about that urn, and he's thinking about his dad. Because at first, I thought maybe he was looking out the window,
Right.
but he's not looking out the window. He's sort of sitting here looking down the way, and various people are kind of coming up and trying to talk to him, trying to console him,
and the urn has been moved into the bedroom.
Yeah.
Right. And speaking of the next page, we cut to the next page where we see him just sitting by himself in the hallway of the house. And the cousin, the surfer cousin that he was speaking about in the last page, wondering to himself what he would be doing, is here.
Oh, see, I didn't get that that's supposed to be his surfer cousin.
Yes, because look at the necklace. It's the same necklace.
I thought it was
same
just
style as the necklace that he was imagining himself wearing.
So see, I didn't even get that. I thought maybe it was just some class kid, some kid from his class or something, or
right. So
okay.
The surfer cousin comes in and is completely tone deaf at the funeral, talking about all the hot women he was having affairs with and the beach parties, and the older kid is barely even listening.
Oh, and then why the other kid is all goth and emo.
And then the second page, you see the second cousin that he was imagining himself spending the summer with, who is the punk emo kid. And again, the kid is just focusing about his life and his situation, while the eldest Locke child sits and just wonders and stares at his father's urn. See, he never stops staring at his father's urn. That's something really interesting. Through the whole time, all his cousins, both his cousins, are talking to him, he's still staring at the urn, except for one instance where his cousin says, "You know they killed 5 people. You are like so famous right now." And that's when he stares at his cousin in an angrily way, like, why are you talking about me being lucky with my father just got killed by those murderers? And then enter his uncle Duncan, who is not tone deaf, who comes at him in a very comforting and understanding way, trying to comfort him, trying to get him to just open up a little bit and feel the pain. And then that leads into a flashback.
Yeah, where he kind of remembers a conversation his parents had one night when they were drinking about how if anything should ever happen to him, that they can go to the Locke house, which is located in Massachusetts, and that they would be safe there. And I guess that always stuck with him, and that's what he's thinking about, is the idea that his dad somehow knew that something would happen to him. And so that's kind of what he's been pondering about. At least that's what I think anyway. Because he happens to be looking at that exact room, thinking about exactly where he's going to be going now, and he happens to then think of that one conversation where his dad talked about where they would go if something were to happen to him.
Right, and it seems as though his dad is talking about the Locke house being a safe area for them to go to, but he just can't quite articulate why. And his wife in the conversation keeps asking him, well, why is it this safe area? It seems as though there's a memory missing, that he can't quite remember why it's the best place to take the kids, but that it is the place, the safest place to take the kids. And then as the flashback goes away, you see him with the uncle, and the uncle speak to him to the point where he finally cries for the first time. And since the whole thing started, he finally cries about his father's death, which I think is a very powerful scene. It's well drawn. The way that his uncle is holding him, and the way that his uncle is trying to hold back tears, but you can still see a bit of it coming out. So that was very well done.
And then you get past the flashback into, which is in the present. We go back to before the death, and they're again going back, and then you notice Bodhi is swatting that skull face moth. Yeah. So Bodhi is already actively fighting against the incoming death, the incoming threat that is coming at them. And of course that's symbolic to how Bodhi acts when the plot actually gets started, that Bodhi is the one that's actually the most, he's not necessarily the most capable or the most able, but he's always the first one that's gonna go in.
Right, and he seems to be the most aware, and the most aware of the situation. And yet again, you see the older brother still talking about how everyone, all his friends, are doing more important things, traveling the world, while he's stuck in this house. And his sister, yet again, is telling him, there's nothing wrong with being here. Why are you so worried about what everyone else is doing? Which is really interesting, and it kind of comes back in the next issue, but that's for another time.
And then, of course, we get the gunshot, where then you see that he looks inside and
through the window,
and sees that the dad's been shot by the two guys, Grub and Lesser, and we see that the guy with the gun clearly shot and killed the dad, and it's implied here too, not necessarily seen, that the other guy may have either finished or was about to
sexually assault the mother. You can see him in the bottom panel walking out while his pants are unzipped, and either he's trying to close them or trying to take them off, and there's bloodied hand palms on the wall, and there's a woman's shoe on the bed. Now, one interesting thing about this page is that it seems as though the father was not supposed to get killed. It's something that the guy with the
skinhead.
Yeah, the skinhead guy seems to imply that they weren't supposed to kill the father or even anyone, but that this dude messed up the plan, whatever the plan was. And so then we cut to there's a sound of noises outside, and we cut to the kids accidentally getting themselves messed up with all the paint. Which was outdoor.
Which is a nice touch because, that sort of remembering sort of the things around you when you're like setting up these scenes, like that's sort of using the environment as sort of a storytelling. Like, oh, there are these paint buckets out here. And you set that up early by saying, oh, they're painting, there's going to be paint out here. And then you get the payoff from that with them falling into the paint bucket. And then that alerts them to send the one guy out. I think, no, the oldest is named Tyler. So we officially know.
Tyler puts his foot in one of the paint cans.
Yeah. And that's when we then get this nice little half page where we see the footprint, the one footprint leading down to the basement cellar, which then leads up to a high shot of the kids hiding behind a chimney.
So you got the second child, the daughter, holding on to the youngest really tightly. This is actually one of my favorite scenes in the whole entire entity of Lock and Key. Just this one scene of the older sister holding her younger brother in a very protective way. It shows how caring and motherly she is, and this does play into her character a lot throughout the series. So they're hiding up there, standing behind the chimney, like out of sight. And then the guy, he sees the footprints and he's like, oh, well, Tyler must be in the basement. So he goes after Tyler down the basement. And then we cut to the present where the uncle and Tyler are in the car driving to the Locke house, and he tries to
I think what they're doing is they're driving in the U-Haul truck, and like the mom and the kids are driving in like another car. So
Right.
so this gives Duncan and Tyler some little one-on-one talking time.
The uncle's trying to get there to Tyler, trying to get him to open up. Tyler is refusing. He talks about how he's going to be known as the kid with the dad who got murdered in the new school. And the uncle's like, well, your identity is what you make of it, so you can change the narrative if you want to. And we get to the Locke house.
Now,
finally.
here's where we get to my big payoff. Now again, this is me putting on my tinfoil hat here. Maybe I've stumbled onto some amazing thing. Maybe I'm full of it. But again, nothing in comics is an accident. Everything is put there for a reason.
Mhm.
Either the writer makes a note to put it there, or the artist comes up with something and puts it in there themselves, or a combination of the two. But there's never an accidental drawing.
Mhm.
All right. So if you'll notice here, they give a nice, gorgeous sort of high up shot of Massachusetts, where they kind of zoom out from the U-Haul to the Locke house, to the Key house, and then all the way out to Lovecraft, Massachusetts, which is this sort of little island town that's connected by a single highway from the mainland. And then, if you turn back here and notice when Bodhi was holding that pile of turd crap, what does it kind of look like?
Oh my god.
Because he's imagining all the different places he could wind up at, and Bodhi hands him this to show him that's where we're gonna go. We're gonna go to the crap.
Right, the
We're going right to the crapper. We're going right to the worst place where we could be sent to.
The shit place, the turd. Oh god. Okay.
There goes the YouTube monetization.
Ah shit. Ah crap. It's so gross. Okay.
Well, the thing that drew me to it is that one, it doesn't even really look like crap. It just looks like some black goo.
Right.
So then that led me to think, well, this has to look like something. And then that's when I started to think it kind of looks like the Massachusetts township if you look at it and if you squint your eyes a little, it's got the main sort of shape to it, and this one end here is going out to the highway. Look, I'm not saying it's a perfect drawing or representation. I'm saying that's my interpretation of it, and I think it fits.
Okay.
To an extent, because I think it's a clever bit of foreshadowing that it just has that Tyler saying they're thinking about where he'd rather be, and then Bodhi, of course, again his name is Bode, as in boding, as in to foretell or to foreshadow. Like, I have a boding. There was a boding or foreboding.
Mm-hmm.
So his name literally means what will be or what is to come.
All right.
And what does he present? He presents like this turd that's shaped kind of like shaped kind of like Lovecraft, Massachusetts. This little island.
All right then.
So, did I blow your mind?
In a way.
In a way.
I'll give your theory a rating of 2 out of 10.
Yeah, but I get a 9 out of 10 for hand reachability out of nowhere.
So then we get to the page where the kids finally reach the house. They reach Key House. They reach Key House, and Tyler says, "Well, was it weird growing up in a house with a name?" Uncle says, "You have no idea." Then the mom says, "You guys get 10 minutes to just stretch your legs. We've been in those cars since forever. It's time for a break. Go walk around." The uncle mentions that, "Hey, this is a big area. You guys might want to play hide and seek." Tyler says, "I'll pass." And then in the next page, the guy, we flash back to when his father was killed, and the guy going down to the basement to search for Tyler. Says, "Come on, Ty, don't play hide and seek with me. Where are you?" So I thought that was a little neat. The connection of the two panels, the two pages,
and then also too, him going into the basement with all these, where this is clearly like kind of the boiler room with all these pipes and stuff. It kind of reminds you of like Nightmare on Elm Street, where when they killed Freddy Krueger, they killed him in a boiler room, and it's kind of like the guy who wrote this, Joe Hill. He's the son of Stephen King. So one thing that I thought was interesting was there's at least a small amount of not only horror tropes in here, or homages maybe, but also possible Stephen King trope and homages. And of course, one of those, some of those being things like, Stephen King always made the stories take place in Maine, and this happens to take place in Massachusetts, another northern state that happens to start with the letter M.
Interesting. Very interesting.
That means that she's not very interested.
No, I'm insanely involved in this amazing tale of places that have M that starts with the letter M. All right.
I felt a connection, just like he said. I felt a connection. And then that's when...
So he goes down to the basement to find Tyler. Tyler gives him a misdirect with the shoe covered in paint and attacks him from behind with what is that?
A brick.
A brick. Dude shoots, but Tyler dodges. A bunch of shots go by. Tyler, it seems like Tyler is about to, get it, but Tyler hits him with the brick a few times and then throws a brick at him, which gets him to drop his gun, and then, Tyler just grabs another brick and starts smashing this dude over the head. And then we see at the end of the panel at page 26 where he's standing over the body with just a smashed head and blood everywhere, blood on Tyler's shirt, on his face. And something I would give the art a credit is that his face and the way that his eyes look and all the blackness really looks like he is scared of what he just did. Like he's mortified of the crime he just committed. But a negative I would have to give this little fight scene is that too much dark, empty spaces, and it really just felt like they just didn't want to draw much, and so they left it all dark. And
I thought it was effective because it's in the dark, so you're not really gonna see that much, and it kind of just, it's not important to show all the events of the fight, just beginning, and then we just kind of jump to the end.
I get that, but the page right next to it also shows them in darkness, but with a bit more detail. So I thought they could do the fight, but still show more detail than have a lot of black negative spaces, which maybe I watch a lot of Ink Master, so it's stuck in my head that if something has too much black negative spaces, it looks like a cover-up, where you could have had something good there, but you just covered it in black ink, and it just, to me personally, it didn't
all this
look
time
well.
I knew there was a problem with you watching too much reality television.
Am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong in that.
One thing I thought that was nice is, you see, up until this point, they've had clearly defined panel grid lines everywhere, but you erase all the panel grid lines for these two pages in this fight, sort of sort of showing that it's so fast that it literally feels like it all happened at once.
Maybe it's just me, but I just didn't like all the dark negative spaces.
Like I said, I thought it was very effective, and also the choice to, again, not have panel lines and sort of not necessarily make the sequence of events be clearly defined and be broken up into these little grid lines. I thought was also a very unique touch. Like that's a neat moment for Gabriel Rodriguez to sort of try a different kind of layout method. And it's really easy for a lot of comic book artists and cartoonists to just draw the simple panel grids and just keep it going. But moments like this where he gets to really experiment and do a different kind of thing, I think that's something that's neat and cool, and it gives a different kind of vibe, which is clearly what he's going for in those 2 pages is a different kind of vibe. Like it's dangerous, it's dark, you can't see what's going on, everything's happening at once, you can't make out exactly sometimes who's even doing what. That's sort of neat. Like,
I don't know. I mean,
anyway, it's whatever you take out of it. It's whatever you take out of it. That's the point of art, right? Is you get out of it whatever you take out of it.
All right. So next panel, we have Tyler opening up a secret door from the basement to the main house, and his dad is actually laying dead on top of the door. The more he opens it, the more he notices that his father is laying on top of it, dead. And then when he gets it all the way open, his dad's dead body falls through it, and the guy says, sorry man, we had to waste his ass. Poetic. And then Tyler has the gun that he took from the other guy and points it at the second guy, the remaining guy. Dude says, I've been counting the shots. I know that you're out of bullets. Then the next page, Mama Bear comes from the bedroom and just, how do you even say that so much has happened?
Well, before we get to that, one neat thing I noticed is that, the gun he's holding is very similar to an iconic revolver gun from Dirty Harry. And in Dirty Harry, there's a scene where he is confronting this criminal, and he's telling him, in any case, the reference to him saying, I counted the shots, I took that to mean that that's a reference to Dirty Harry. Maybe that's just me, but I think it's another little wink and nod to it.
Since you mentioned that, I'm pretty sure that's not the same gun, or am I wrong?
No,
does it look like the same gun here and then there?
Yeah, it's. I'd say it's mostly the same. It's just, again, it's dark, so I guess he didn't want to draw it in super hyper detail, because then it would look odd. Like, why is it so dark? But this Magnum is perfectly shiny and metallic.
Right. Oh, and one thing also I wanted to point out is that Tyler's facial expression is really nice. He looks worried and scared and just unsure of himself while holding the gun and pointing it to this guy. And I very much appreciate that, because this child, and he is still a child, just recently murdered a guy by beating his head in with a brick.
And one thing I always noticed about Gabriel Rodriguez drawing this is that he always, the way he draws faces is that they always look kind of ugly.
Yes.
And
all ugly.
Well, they're not they're not super ugly, but they're like.
Thank you for saying it, because I thought I was crazy. That I literally thought every single person in here looks insanely unattractive,
except for Bodhi, because he's drawn with very simple lines, and so he has kind of this little boyish face. So
I would say a few characters in the later volumes look kind of attractive, but everyone else, especially in this first volume, even the mom, is just.
And then another neat thing he does is he always draws in the teeth,
Yeah.
which you know, from what I've always seen and read about with cartoonists and artists in comics is that when it comes to doing teeth, like you either don't put the teeth in with the mouth, or you just draw the one line and then you just make it white, like it'll look like maybe you're drawing just one line of white, and that's supposed to be the mouth and the teeth. Only if you're doing like a super close up, you might actually draw in the teeth. But in here, it seems like he's always like doing his best. Like even right here, where it looks like it's just one long streak, but he does put little ridges to kind of say, here's kind of where all the teeth would be. And I thought that was kind of neat, and maybe that's also a reason why some of the faces look kind of ugly. Is that, you know, when you draw in teeth,
it doesn't look pretty.
Yeah, it's kind of like Muppets. Like you put teeth in Muppets, like they look weird or bizarre.
Right, and in this page, you see the mother hit this the last house invader with
the skinhead
in the back of the head with the hatchet, like right deep in there, and you can see that she's crying. Her face looks insanely distraught, and her dress is ripped up all over the place, and she looks like she's having an insanely horrible time, which I'm not going to say that she was sexually assaulted, but it does, you know, lead more towards something very inappropriate happened with her, between her and the guy in the bedroom. And then the next panel, she tells Tyler to run, go get Kenzie and Bode and
Oh, so her name is Kenzie. We've got all the Locke kids' names. It only took us 30 pages, but we got all the kids' names.
Right, and she tells him to go get his siblings and then run to the neighbor's place. And then now down here you see, and on page 29 you see Tyler turn to his side to look at the floor and see his dad that fell through the trap door, and he says dad. But what I like about it is that same pose is held as we go to the second panel where he's at his dad's funeral and he's looking at his dad's page, and the third panel when they're in the Locke house and he's looking at the little lake thing. What's that? Like a small little pool,
like a little pond, maybe
a small little man-made pond.
And then again, you notice it's all perfectly lined with it's all squared up.
Yes, I would say this was really well done, and the pose remains the same. It's just the hairs and the clothing is changed, but the expression on his face remains the same. Just a deep confusion and sadness. And so in the next page, his sister Kenzie comes looking for him, and she's asking him, hey, you want to go look around and check this place out? And she says, you can have a pick of any room you want since you're the oldest. And she's being insanely sweet, which I really like. She's still being kind to her brother and not being mean and still being respectful. And he says, it doesn't matter, it's whatever. And she starts talking about how she's been crying so much and how this whole thing is just hurting. And she says, I don't know how you can keep it together. And then especially, and here's what she says. She says, I mean, I've cried about it 1,000 times. I know you and Dad butted heads a lot, but you were like Christ, like his favorite or something. Aw shit, here I go again. Now, that favorite line is something that goes back to when she was talking about how she was helping her dad paint the house, and while Tyler was just messing around somewhere. And I thought that was interesting because she seems to have been the more helpful one. She was always helping Dad. She was always being the nice little child. And while he was butting heads and being a conflict, and yet in her eyes, she saw that he was the favorite child. I thought that was really interesting. a little interesting take there. How she saw herself as not as loved as her brother, even though she was the most helpful and the one who was basically there for the family.
And also that feeling kind of reminds me of a earlier page where they're talking about going to the new school, and they mention uh, while they're driving there that great, that's who I am now. You only get to be one thing in high school: the jock, the slut, the smart kid. I get to be the victim. And then what? And then maybe that's some foreshadowing into kind of where the kids fall in place with their designated roles.
Yeah. Yeah, it does seem that way.
And then also too, that also falls into the tropes of your standard horror story, where again, in your standard horror story, you always have a jock, a slut, a smart kid, a victim.
Okay.
So it's sort of setting it up like, it's the classic haunted house story where it's like, don't go into the house because once you go in, the haunt begins. And it's a lot of neat sort of things where you can see like these horror tropes that are kind of being set up.
And then in the same page, as Kenzie is crying, she asks her brother, who's been staring at the mermaid pond, she says, "What are you looking at down here?" The brother says, "Nothing, water, nothing." While we are seeing what he's actually looking at in the pond, which is he sees an image of himself, except all bloodied up with the gun and
him right after his dad died, looking down and saying basically, those other times he was reflecting on what he could be, and now he's reflecting on
what he turned out to be, which essentially is a killer.
Yeah.
Yeah, a murderer, and that's how he sees himself. And it's just crushing how he's gaining all of this guilt for essentially just defending himself and defending his family, but he came out of it so fucked up that he's broken. He feels as though he's
there goes the monetization again.
No.
Oh well. I guess we're gonna have to at some point set up a Patreon then, because we're not gonna be able to make it off of the ad revenue.
Then Tyler asks, "Where's Bud?" And the sister says, "I haven't seen him. He's probably running around exploring." Brother says, "Let's go find him." Sister says, "It's been 10 minutes. What danger could he possibly be?" And then we see him climbing a whole bunch of books that he set up for himself so he can grab onto a bunch of swords that are mounted on the wall.
And then, if you notice here, the family coat of arms actually includes keys and a lock, meaning that this key house isn't just a recent thing. Even this goes back hundreds of years that this family has been involved with these keys.
I like that detail, yeah.
And of course, with this, we see that Bodhi, while reaching for the sword, he
notices that there's a key on top of a door, mounted on top of the door frame, and that quickly draws it to his attention away from the sword. So he just leaps off of the books, grabs a broomstick, gets the key, and then he stares at it. And we see it's a key with a skull on top of it. And then he puts it through the door, which the doorknob also has a little skull right there.
Yeah, it's not only a skull, but there's also a tiny ankh at the center there, which is an Egyptian symbol for like death and rebirth. And
indeed, it also looks like something else, but I'm gonna save that for when we get there. And then the next page we see it's a prison.
Yeah, we cut to a prison, which is still in the present, where the one guy, I think it's Lesser. I think it's Lesser who actually is the convict that wasn't killed.
Right, he didn't die. The one that got bludgeoned, I thought he died, but no, he did not die. He survived.
Fake news.
And his face is all messed up with stitches, so he really got messed up. And he's talking he says, "What's wrong?" The security guard asks him, "What's wrong with you, Lesser?" He says, "There's an echo in here. Do you hear that perfect echo?" Security guard says, "You weird shit." And then he says, "Where are you? I did everything you asked. You promised me a new home, a new place."
And
so he's talking to like
a new face.
The sink.
Yes,
but the sink.
but in the sink, oh, it's just his reflection back.
It's just his reflection, but it's an echo though. It's an echo that he's hearing.
It's like I've, and ace.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm guessing it's him, listening to the things. But what's interesting here is that he's talking to the pool, and then the pool.
In the next page, we see his face turns into this face of this woman that we haven't met before, and the image says to him, "You have both," implying that now he has a new home, the jail, and a new face with all the stitches. And then the guy says, "No, this isn't better. You promised me better. You promised to set me free." And the image says, "And I will. I always keep my promises. Soon all doors will be opened, and the door to your cell will be one of the first." Then the guy asks when, and the echo repeats when.
Yeah. What's interesting here is, again, this plays into some more horror tropes. Note that this is actually a twofer here. Two classic tropes. One, his old man Stephen King, when in It, his old man Stephen King, with It, where in It you get the guy, the bully who is put in the mental asylum and is then let loose by Pennywise to go and kill the kids as adults.
And is being manipulated by It.
Yes. Yeah. And then secondly, it's also it also could be a reference to say like Dracula. In Dracula, he had a minion named Fritz who he promised to turn into a vampire if he served him, and Fritz was also gathered up and put in a mental asylum, communicating with his master, and the whole time Dracula promising him, I will grant you the strength I have if you serve me and follow me. So it's still drawing on a lot of these classic tropes of, you have the minion who wants something, and the manipulator who is moving his little chess pieces in place. And then you also get a neat little tidbit right here.
At the end, we get to zoom out and see where exactly this person is, and he's at the San Lobo Juvenile Detention. Then it says, "Caution, hitchhikers may be escaped."
Yeah, and of course, what is Lobo Spanish for?
I do not know. What is it Spanish for, my Spanish-speaking husband?
Wolf.
Ooh.
And we know that that's going to play some part later.
Ooh, foreshadowing!
And then we get...
Next page, we come back to Bud unlocking the door, and he opens it with the key. First, he sticks his head out and sees, nothing. And then he tries to walk through the door, but we see that his soul is separated from his body. His body falls backward inside the house, limp, and his soul escapes through the door.
Yeah, somehow, this is the first instance now that we're seeing this, one of the effects of these keys here, where by using that particular key on that particular door, that by walking through, it separates your soul self or your astral self from your physical body, and then you can leave and go do whatever, but then by re-entering the same way you came, you can then be rejoined with the body.
Yes, and something of note as well is that the first person to find these keys is Bud, the youngest of the children.
And then what do we see at the end here? Our little friend, the skull-faced moth, has now entered, landed on him, and I'm gonna say that's an absolute dead-on reference to Silence of the Lambs. A skull-faced moth literally landing on the character's face or mouth, and again, this representing death, and then it just so happens that the moth landing on Bodhi is the moment he comes back to life.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of in that sense,
type thing.
Yeah, it's like a connection.
Mm-hmm. Then we clearly see in the next panel that Bodhi is shocked. He has to face a shock and maybe a little bit of fear, because in the next panel we see the door, bam, slam shut with him not outside of it. So we clearly see that he's a little terrified of what just occurred.
And then
that ends issue 1 of Locke and Key.
Which is nice because of course the first page started with a door.
Yes.
And the ending just so happens to also end with a door, with the moth. With the moth first starting on the left, mm-hmm. and then ending on the right, as though it just continued on.
All right. So now we will talk about what worked in this first issue and what didn't work. So I will go first. For me, what worked was the kids. I love the kids. I love the characteristics of the kids and what's been set up with them. With Kinsey, how she's the helpful child, how she's always willing to help and do whatever she can for the parents. And when they have Tyler, whose head is stuck in the clouds, he'd literally rather be anywhere than where he is at any given time. And then we have Bodhi, just the playful type. He's just all over the place, having fun, minding his own business, not caring about anything. That's where it starts. And then where it ends, you could kind of see that little bit of a change in Kinsey, how she's just like uncertain of herself now, how she's just so like tears everywhere, crying every 5 minutes, like she's really affected. And then Tyler, he just seems like no longer stuck in the clouds. He seems very much in the present, but in like a very traumatic and traumatizing way. But then we have Bodhi, someone who we can clearly see is not affected by all this death that had occurred around him.
Well,
it seems very sheltered.
It makes you wonder, though, like how much of it he saw, or how much of it he actually understood. Because of course, Kinsey and Bodhi probably stayed up on that roof the whole time until everything was ended. So so it's possible that they didn't see anything. So they're the least traumatized of all of them.
And it's even then you have to consider that perhaps Kinsey and Tyler also got to see their father before he was cremated, but Bodhi probably didn't have that opportunity.
Since Kinsey was helping with the pain, she's probably the last of the kids to actually see him.
Yes.
And it's also interesting that you mentioned their personalities, because what I see a lot of times especially when you have a trio of characters, you see it in say Evangelion, and you see it here and in some other places. Typically when you write 3 main characters, what you'll sometimes do is base their personality traits on the 3 psychological identities, or 3 psychological personalities in psychology, which is the id, the ego, and the superego. So inside your mind, there's these 3 subconscious that are always going on. And in their cases, the id, which is all about me, I'm going to do what I want. That's Bodhi. That's Bodhi.
I don't know. Because
he's always doing what he does. No, Tyler comes later. Kinsey is always giving. She's always wanting to do for others, and she's always thinking of others. So that makes her the ego, where she's wanting to think of other people. She's willing to put other people's needs above herself, and that leads to Tyler. Tyler is the super ego, which is that he's the moderation between the two. He decides when is it more important to do for yourself, when is it more important to be there for others. And I think that plays a lot into what becomes their dynamic as the story goes on, because Tyler, being the oldest, is obviously going to take the leadership role,
right.
and then of course the other neat thing is that the traits that define them and give them strength will ultimately be the things that they are targeted for. Kinsey's empathy and her emotions are going to play a role later.
And that brings me to what I didn't like, which I'm sorry. One thing that y'all, whoever watches this and listens to this, has to know about me is that when it comes to comics, I am insanely superficial. I'm sorry. I will apologize for this to the end of time, but I love pretty things. I love pretty art, and more often than not, I will just like suffer with a well drawn artistic book with a bad story than a horribly written book with a great story. That's just me. I'm super absorbed when it comes to comics, and the art is definitely nothing to write home about.
Really?
There are definitely moments where the facial expressions are just phenomenal, and they do very much showcase what the characters are actually going through at the time. But everything else is just it isn't attracting me to it.
Well, I know definitely in this first part there's not a lot there to really draw you in visually, but I would argue that in the later parts.
I want to bring into the I'm skipping a little bit, but I want to bring into some of the other volumes, and something I noticed in the first volume is that the face of the woman is
the mom?
Yes, the mom. Is eerily similar to the faces of a good few of the other women that we get introduced to in the later volumes.
Oh, so, because she has kind of that skinnier, more elongated kind of face, and the kind of sharp nose, and then the sort of streaked down hair.
The hair with like the little tiny strands in the front to kind of show a bob, but not really.
Give her bangs.
Yeah.
Call those bangs.
Little bangs. That did throw me off a little bit. But yeah, I'm not that huge of a fan of the art. And another thing that didn't really work, I feel, is like the implied sexual thing, because as far as my memory can go, I don't remember it ever being like talked about or even dealt with in the other volumes, and I could be wrong. And if we continue it and we see that it is dealt with, then I will come back here and apologize and whatever. But it feels that since it was subtly kind of implied, it was just there to kind of get the readers to feel something, but then it's not going to be talked about or even like tackled in the later volumes. And that's kind of,
I don't know. I think maybe it was kind of like one of those things where it's like he was just kind of sneaking it in to like just be this kind of thing where if you blink you'll miss it kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
And that's why it's not a big deal. It's not that big of a deal. If you don't notice it, which I barely noticed it my first time reading through Locke and Key. I didn't notice it. So if for those who don't notice it, I'm guessing just like, well, whatever. She was just probably attacked and that's it.
And that's sort of the thing that happens. That's why I would suggest, if you're going to do a deep dive, if you're going to actually look through comics multiple times, one thing I suggest that will always give you an interesting view is just look at the pages without the word bubbles.
Right.
Just look at the pictures themselves. And
you get more detail of like more artistic details that way.
And you sometimes can see things out of context with the word bubbles, and sometimes that could be like something completely different, something you didn't even notice before.
Right, because the first time I was reading it, I was more story driven. Like, I was really interested. Oh my gosh, is the dad okay? Is he really dead? So I wasn't paying attention to the art, but mostly just to the word bubbles in the story. So I never noticed like the shoe and him, having his zipper open. I never noticed that the first time around. The second time around, I'm looking at the art since we're gonna be reviewing it. I want to see if there's something really neat that I noticed, and that's what I noticed. So yes, all in all, same rating as since we began, 5 out of 10. It's not bad, but it's not great. It's an introduction, and it does its job well as an introduction. Just a few little things are just not very interesting to me.
Yeah, it really is just sort of a setup for things.
Yeah.
It's not. This is why I know that for me what worked is just again it does the job of setting things up. It gets the characters introduced, and then it gets you into the key house, which is why the first volume is called Welcome to Lovecraft. It puts you there.
Oh yeah, that was a really nice title.
And again, Lovecraft is again a reference to Lovecraft, Howard P. Lovecraft, who is a very well known horror author, who also would talk about things like monsters and creatures from other dimensions and stuff, and we'll see some of that maybe in the later parts. So again, all of these references to horror things are not just there to look pretty or whatever. They have a meaning, I think. And then as far as what didn't work, I'm gonna say the art. If you're like me and you read all the way through, you remember the parts where it looked really nice, and then of course when you go back and you read the first parts of it again, and you notice that someone like Gabriel Rodriguez, who didn't really have a lot of stuff before this, I think. This was his big breakout thing. So you kind of see that he's not as, it doesn't look as good as it does later. So
Right.
It's kind of like you're stepping back and you're seeing like the earlier performances of an actor or something, and you're seeing like, okay, he's not as good here, but I'm seeing where that potential is going to go. And as far as other stuff, I kind of wish maybe there was something with some setup with some of the other maybe the dad or the
right.
I
actually forgot to mention that. I wish there was. I love the kids, and I know this is primarily going to be focusing on the children, so they deserve just about all of the setup. But I do wish we could have gotten more from the mom, aside from her being attacked and then her being like, "Kids, go play." I wish there would have been at least just one page or one panel where we get just a tiny bit of information.
It's kind of like Star Wars, right? Oh no, my parents are dead. Oh no! Oh, it's like, oh no, the Ewoks. That means I gotta go fight Uncle. Then we gotta just drive right back. Same. Same shit. Look, we gotta save on that budget there. All right, we can't. We gotta trim the fat.
Right. So lastly, we've come to the end of this charming little podcast. So, question is, will you continue to the next issue? This is for me and you, and also for the audience. So, Matthew, will you continue to the next issue?
Well, I guess I have to, right? I bought them all. I'm kind of committed.
I really fell in love with the kids. That was the driving force as to why I continued. I really want to know what's next for these children. So, absolutely, for the kids, even though I gave it a low rating, for the children, I desperately want to know what's next for the kids. So, yes, I will be continuing to the next issue.
All right.
So, everyone, leave a comment and let me know if you also want to continue or if this is it. If this is, your one and only, and you're done with Locke and Key, and you're just going to fucking throw it away and call it a day. This has been Turn the Key podcast with me, Cynthia, and my amazing husband, Matthew, a.k.a. MangaMatt.